Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of chapter 7. So there's been a little bit of a break, actually, since we've done part 1 of this video. A kind of an interesting break in a way. I was just thinking, Scott, a couple of things have happened. One is we've done our summit and we got to speak to John Martineau about the beautiful patterns of order he's identified in the solar system, which we spoke about in the previous video, so that was a nice
That was
little,
amazing. Yeah, I'm so glad that we
yeah,
got to meet him and talk with him and
he's,
also have that recording available for everyone to listen to and watch.
that's what I was just going to say. It's available for everyone. Yeah. And some other things, like I actually happened to get away for the first time in 2 years to a beautiful workshop with Rupert Spira, who's, a core influence for Scott and I on non-duality. It's a very rich workshop. I absolutely adored it. And we had the Webb telescope go up as well. Have you had a chance to look at any of the new images, Scott?
Oh, they're amazing, super beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that that was a success because it was probably the most difficult scientific project ever to be made by humans.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I just feel they're kind of like on track with what we're discussing here, because like I absolutely adore this part of sacred geometry, which is, it's led me to a sort of an exploration of the finely tuned universe, and I'm certainly no expert at it, but what happens to me when I look into just how finely tuned certain aspects of our reality is, it just kind of brings me into that awe space where I'm like, wow, are you kidding me? There's stuff that you explain about, particularly biology and proteins and the combination of folding that happen. We're going to talk about it here in this video. And the probabilities of like how many ways they're able to fold up. And if they didn't fold up just exactly the way they do, then we wouldn't have any cells or any life, or you and I wouldn't be here.
Well, we're kind of continuing our journey down from the macrocosm, eventually into the microcosm. And I think we're going to start here on cities, talk about the patterns of order there.
Well, you jump in, Scott. Yeah, exactly. And we'll go with cities. I'm right here with you.
Okay, we all know that cities have their own unique character, right? Mm-hmm. Like Paris feels different than London, and it's somehow there's a thing called the genius loci in architectural training. I remember learning about this, which is like the spirit of the place. And I speculate that actually might be a literal mind, a certain level of organization above the individual human that coordinates the activities of people in that region. And in the book, I have a graphic that compares the human neurons in the brain to the road networks around Paris. And I chose Paris because the roads around there kind of developed organically without much city planning, if any at all. And the patterns look pretty much identical. It's kind of a filamentous branching network between the two. On the left is the brain, on the right is the roads. And I write this in the book that let's say you were a truck driver on one of the roads of France, and you asked that driver if they thought they were part of some larger French supermind, they would probably think you're crazy because that's not their experience as an individual. And I suspect that if you were able to ask a single neuron's cellular mind whether it subjectively believed, if it was part of a larger organism and they were in what they call the brain, that neuron would think you were crazy because that wasn't its individual experience either. And so I think I don't know for certain if there's a mind in a city, but I think that the structures and the symmetry of it suggests that there might be. And I know that we can experience that by getting into that genius loci of that place and feeling that vibe of that place that you're in. And then you never notice that unless you leave. You go to another city, live in that city for a while, and then you notice that everything is different. There's so many different aspects that it starts to take on a personality. And that's where you start to speculate that there might be an invisible mind governing your thoughts in some way, your thought forms when you're in that locality. Does that resonate with you, Geoff?
Yeah, it does. I mean, to be honest, right? And I suppose I'm just be devil's advocate here. I've seen these kind of this looks like that type of pictures, like, so I'm just going to hold it up to the camera here, but we might even get a proper graphic for the video. But it absolutely is undeniable that the neurons in the brain look similar to road networks. I've actually seen John Martineau give a lecture on this, and he used the exact same imagery. And he also had another one about the filamentous connectivity between galaxies. And that when you look at the universe, that this type of pattern where you essentially have nodes and then filaments connecting the nodes, just like in a brain, it also happens on the galactic level, And so I like this one, but sometimes it's a bit like, this looks like that, therefore they're the same. I mean, it's just like some people might get this one and love it, but I'm just excited about what's to come. You know what I mean? I think it's an interesting analogy. I do absolutely agree when I go to Paris, it has a vibe and a feeling and a character and a personality. And that vibe and personality and character is completely different to going to London or Amsterdam. And so I could totally sign up to there being a kind of an invisible mind, that seems to permeate a place. And maybe it's linked to all of these connectivities like roads and so on, perhaps.
But I don't think that analogy, that comparison constitutes proof, because when you look at the human neurons, it doesn't really prove that there's consciousness there. It just shows that it's an organic information processing network. And I think that the road networks are also an organic information processing network. If you take that, the information would be like trucks or cars driving along the roads and going from place to place. It's kind of a quanta of information. When the truck arrives, it registers. And we know that in an app, you get a tracking number and then your package has arrived. And but that doesn't prove that there's consciousness there either.
Yeah.
That is invisible. And so we can't probe that directly. We can only introspect on it. And what you're saying about, like, you could sign up to that feeling of Paris as a different personality than Dublin or London or whatever, Amsterdam. But that's something that you have access to inside. And you're connecting on a soul level to that city, right? And you're saying, yeah, it definitely does. And that's what I'm noticing. And the only physical correlate in the visible world are these filamentous branching patterns that we see at all different scales. And that, because we see that at all different scales, and they do seem to be correlates to minds, I think it's a signature of that. It's like, hey, there's probably a mind here. If you look at a mycelial mushroom mat, it looks like that too. And then you start to think, well, maybe the mushroom has a mind.
Yeah.
So, and also the internet. If you look at these maps of the whole internet, they have this quality too. And you start to wonder, wow, maybe the internet has a mind. And if what that mind is, I don't know if I like it at this moment in history, but
I like it, and it's I like the way you say it's not a proof, but it definitely is an interesting analogy, that's interesting to me,
because you can always collapse it down and say there's no proof here. I'm a truck driver on a road. I'm not part of a national supermind, forget it. That perspective will always be valid. But I'm proposing an alternative that's kind of out on the skinny branches because I can't prove it. I can't weigh and measure it. But I think that we've all experienced that to some level, the genius loci.
Yeah. Can I jump in here with something lovely just from Michael Schneider, and I think it relates to this. But when I was prepping for his interview, in the summit. Again, this is totally available for you guys if you want to watch it bonus round, go to the summit and watch it free. But he made this lovely point that when you're talking about sacred geometry, and we talk about sacred places, like you go to Avebury and it's a sacred stone circle, or you go to Stonehenge or Newgrange here in Ireland, that these are sacred monuments that were built with intent by the ancients and coded with all of these geometries, and you go to them and you feel a sense of sacredness, right? But he just made, and I never really heard this before with sacred geometry. He said, it's not so much that the stones in Avebury are sacred per se, but that you carry the sacred within you, in your heart, in your soul. And it's the sacred within you then consecrates the space as sacred, and I just found that really interesting, because to somebody who's not tapped into the sacredness of their soul, they might go to Avebury and just think they're a load of boring stones stuck in the ground. And that's a valid point of view. But so
and you probably feel that way when you're a kid and your parents dragged you along and you're like, God, a bunch of stones, so stupid.
Yeah, exactly. But, so what makes something sacred? It just got me thinking, I really like, he articulated it better than I did there, but I just like that point. It's a bit similar to, if depending how you approach these neural networks will determine, how they manifest for you, whether they're sacred or whether they're not,
Well, it's whether you're connecting with your soul, or whether you're just taking everything at face value and being very literal and materialist about it. So it has to do with that tension between body and soul, I think, ultimately. Is whether you can perceive these things. I
know I'm digressing, we're only one page in. But you know what? I don't want to rush this at all, Scott, because honestly, like with Reality Atlas, we've gone so deep, and this chapter in particular is so rich. I think we're just going to break it into nice bite-sized 40-50-minute videos and just don't hold back. You know what I mean? We don't have to rush through it.
Shall we move on though to the next?
The next architecture.
Architecture. So we're zooming in on from the city down to like one building.
I get it.
So we're getting closer to the human scale here. When I talk about Marcus Pollio Vitruvius, who wrote the 10 books of architecture in ancient Rome, and his book ended up being very influential 1500 years later in the Renaissance. And that's where Leonardo da Vinci illustrated the human body using Vitruvius's proportions. And that's why they call it the Vitruvian man. But Vitruvius was kind of steeped in the ancient traditions, and he believed that buildings had, if you want to make a especially resonant building, it has to have three qualities: strength, utility, and beauty. And to me, when I hear that, alarm bells go off, and it reminds me of like strength. And we're talking about a building. A strong building is like, it has a truth to it. It has a
I see where you're going here.
It's a true structure. It's fulfilled its mission as a building. And then if it has utility, it has a kind of goodness to it because it's useful to human life. And then of course beauty. It has a beauty. And so what this is really an articulation of the transcendentals in another guise, in the practical guise of the building. He's trying to essentially imbue those Platonic ideas in the building. And then Vitruvius is the guy that we always kind of go back in history and point to and say, he was the one who articulated the fact that the best buildings mimic the human body. He wrote that just so the parts of the temples should correspond with each other and with the whole. So he's talking about proportion right there. And it reminds me a little bit of the golden ratio, in that the whole is to the larger as the larger is to the smaller. And this is also encoded in the proportions of the human body. I don't know all the proportions, but it's all very, very much proportionally related. And classical architecture is all about proportions and relationships between parts. And out of that arises a kind of harmony, where the parts become, the whole work becomes more than the sum of its parts. It becomes all interconnected and resonant. And in that way, it allows, in a sense, I think it allows soul to come into it. And so, like we were talking earlier about cities, I believe that a really impressive work of singular architecture can also have a soul. It can have a kind of definite feeling that you have when you're in that structure. And the best ones give you a sort of reverential feeling of awe. And you'll get this oftentimes going into, let's say, a Gothic cathedral or the Roman Pantheon or these like UNESCO World Heritage buildings, right? You go in there and you're like, oh my God, I'm blown away. I'm transported, you know? And it's kind of like the religious people who made these cathedrals made such a powerful works of architecture that you kind of want to sign up to that religion because it's such a beautiful space to be in.
Well, absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. And this reminds me of I put in the book a quote from Beverly Spicer, who actually attended one of our early workshops in Ireland.
Beverly, yeah.
Yeah. And I got this from her architectural thesis that she was kind enough to send me, but she really expressed it well. And she says the human becomes microcosm of the house, just as the house becomes microcosm of the cosmos. The inverse is true as well. The cosmos is macrocosm to the house is macrocosm to the human, and the human is therefore in profound interrelationship with the cosmos. And I think that's the essence of what Vitruvius was going for, was creating, using proportion, is creating a harmony as above, so below. And when you come into harmony with the larger picture, with things that are much vaster than we are as individuals, that's where the magic happens. That's where you're just totally transported and blown away. And I think we don't have that many structures that fulfill that. But if you're lucky enough to go into one of them, you'll just be like, oh my God, I want to be an architect. That's what inspired me, I think, to want to be an architect and study that in university, was having this experience of the numinous, of the ineffable, of the transcendent in the form of a building. You know?
It's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, look, I can relate to that, Scott. You know, I mean, some of my, you know, most significant spiritual episodes have happened when I walked into either a church or a temple or something. Like I remember being down by the Trevi fountain one time, and I went into a church right beside it in Rome. And it wasn't like the most elaborate, fancy church or whatever, but there was something in the structure of the building that just activated something in me, you know, just acted something really, really profound, actually. And you have that sort of like beyond words, ineffable experience of the numinous, just to use your words, you know. And so buildings undeniably have this power when they're built upon these principles that encode those larger patterns of order in the cosmos. You're reminding me as well of, read an amazing book by Rudolf Steiner. It's like Art as Spiritual Activity. And he was speaking about the guy Goethe, Goethe. I don't know how you pronounce it, Goethe. And he was very into like creating buildings that he referred to as like buildings will speak, you know, that they would actually transmit information just through the buildings, you know. So like it's a very big movement that you're referring to here. I think, you know, some great thinkers were tapped into it.
It's like, again, it's like, just like when I'm trying to convey information to you through the medium of Zoom, it's going through an intermediary of the world, but it's going from my soul, hopefully, into your soul. Okay. And I'm reaching you on a deep level. And architecture can also be that intermediate. It can be that transmitter of the soul of that space to you. And
beautifully said.
Yeah, but usually it's not. And usually buildings are made for practical reasons, and there's not too much thought given to the harmony or the proportion, and we've certainly kind of almost forgotten that now. You have to be a student of architectural history to start learning about classical orders and proportions and everything, because now buildings are more a personal expression of the designer. And more often than not, they're not really tuned in with as above, so below. They're just doing something for their ego, maybe, or for the client's wishes, the client's ego. But I think it would be wise if we could get back on track of designing things that resonate with the larger picture that transcends all of humanity. And maybe that can be done only in kind of religious architecture, because that's a place where the clients are open to that, you know. But anyway, I digress. Well, the architect
actually, to be honest, I like this digression. Just on a side note, there's a wonderful sacred geometer and a dear friend of mine, I haven't been in touch with him for a while, called Michael Rice. And he actually is an architect who's kind of fully devoted to designing buildings that are explicitly encoded with sacred geometry, you know, from start to finish. And like, yeah, I mean, it's not like every house that gets built in Ireland uses, you know, Michael Rice as an architect, you know, but there are considered people who have built houses using his designs, and they are extraordinary. His own house was a work of art, you know.
There's just singular architects who go down that road. It reminds me of Tadao Ando, who's a Japanese architect who did a lot of churches out of concrete, and they had such a soft, subtle, numinous quality to them. And
they're so different.
It was
aren't they?
so odd that he could do that out of such a dead material as concrete. You know, but he sculpted the space and played with light in such a way that it really worked. Wow. And so that sometimes you get these singular geniuses who are able to manifest and be kind of conduits for spirit, for soul to come into that building. You know, we could go on about this for the next hour.
Yeah. We better. I actually happily could, no, but let's stay on it. So, are we going to move to the human body?
Yeah. So now we're.
Or is there anything else in architecture you want to close off?
No, that's fine. We're moving in now all the way to the human scale. So we're very familiar with this, and I've already mentioned the Vitruvian Man, right? And it turns out to be probably, I've heard it referred to as the third most popular artwork in the world after the Mona Lisa and Michelangelo's Creation of Adam fresco. You have the Vitruvian Man. But I would say that it is the most iconic depiction of the human anatomy ever made. And I actually did a version of it where half of it is male and half of it is female.
I like that one,
because I feel like this is a work about the human body, not just the male body, really. And anyway, that's my own take on it. But what I did is I analyzed that drawing using golden rectangles, because I wrote a book on Leonardo da Vinci, and I show in that book how he uses golden rectangles to structure most of his work. And he uses those golden rectangles, which have a primary division at the golden ratio, to point out specific features in the paintings. Usually the third eye is what he's pointing to with that. But in the Vitruvian Man, this isn't a work of art, it's more a work of proportion in a sense. But if you put the golden rectangle on the square, then the golden ratio, the primary division, points at the navel, which is the center of the body and the center of the circle. And so what I feel like is the square represents the body. And at its highest, at that golden ratio point, it marks the center of the circle, which is like the soul side of the street. It's the gateway to the invisible domain.
It's like if you put another golden rectangle, I think, over the circle, the golden ratio cut goes to the heart. Is that right?
That's right. And so the heart would be like the center of the chakra system, the center of the subtle body,
Mhm.
So we're moving up from the center of the physical body being the navel to the circle, which brings the
That's
center
amazing,
into
by
the
the way,
heart.
Scott. That's an
Yeah,
amazing finding. I love that one. The square and the circle cut with the golden ratio gives you the navel and the heart. I totally get it.
yeah. I mean, I think that's a super profound insight there.
Really
That
is.
it's easy to gloss over and think, oh yeah, no more golden rectangles, and you don't even, a lot of people don't even really study it and look at it and understand what I'm trying to say there
Yeah, it's
is
a big one. It's a big
super
one, in my opinion.
profound. Yeah.
Mm.
Another really big one is to step back a minute and look at the scale of all that is in the visible. And
Mhm.
so the smallest thing is really the proton, because
Mhm.
smaller than that, you have quarks, which we'll talk about later, but they don't really exist in the sense that the only way to get at them is to break apart the proton, and then they only exist for 10 to the minus 23rd seconds, and then they're
Mhm.
gone. So, and you can't really measure them because they're so fleeting. But the smallest measurable thing in the visible universe is the proton. And then if you look at the largest structure in the entire universe, it would have to be the whole universe, the whole visible universe, everything that we can see and weigh and measure with telescopes and instruments. And if you figure out where is the human scale in relationship to this spectrum, all that goes all the way from the smallest to the largest, well, it turns out that the human scale is right at the golden ratio point. And I have an
Mm.
illustration in the book that shows that. And so that divides all that is in the visible world into a macrocosm and a microcosm. And the human being is right at that pivot point between them.
Mhm.
And it's not just the human, but it's sort of any organism that's anywhere from half a meter to 5 meters in size. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying that humans are special in that regard, but our scale is very special. And maybe that's why we have this domain to operate in, because we're uniquely poised in the middle, in a sense, and able to look down into the microcosm and study that, to look out into space with the James Webb Space Telescope and see all of
Mhm.
that. And it's a very kind of privileged point of view and scale that we
A
get to
privileged
inhabit.
point of view. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible. By the way, I don't know enough about physics, but in the nucleus of an atom, you have neutrons and protons. Isn't that right? And is a neutron bigger than a proton?
They're around the same size, but the proton has the right combination of quarks to give it a positive one charge.
Okay.
And that's balanced out by the electron, which has a net negative one charge that
Mm-hmm.
goes around. So the simplest atom of all just has one proton and no neutron and one electron. That's the
Okay.
hydrogen atom.
Uh-huh. Okay, I get you.
Yeah.
That's why you chose that as the smallest measurable thing in the universe.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you calibrate your ruler that way, then the math, and I show it in the book, the math works out
Yeah.
so that it's a golden ratio where we are.
It's that these are mind blowers, Scott. I totally get this one as well,
Mhm.
and it does kind of point to the privileged position in our universe, doesn't it? I don't know. I'm trying to get that into focus
I
here.
can put that up in a graphic in
Yeah, that would be
post
great. Yeah.
production.
But
Yeah.
was that one of your own findings, that one? Because it's extraordinary,
Yeah, that
Um,
was when I figured that out, I was just like transported to another.
So can we just take a pause here, just for people who are like, because you're very familiar with this work, and I am too, to a degree, but just to I'd love to give more airtime to that heart and navel thing in the Vitruvian Man, but let's just stick on this kind of the privileged position of like where humans exist in the proportioning scaling system of the universe. So you've measured the very, very smallest thing that you're claiming for good
Well,
reason. I think people would agree with you.
I haven't personally measured it, but it's given that it's
Yeah,
10 to the minus 16th meters
you've
is the
you've
approximate
chosen the
size.
proton as the smallest thing, I
Mhm.
suppose, which I think is a very fair. You've justified that very fairly, right? So yeah, I'll go with that, no problem. And then you've also claimed that the largest thing we can measure is the entire totality of the size of the universe. So that's pretty fair as well, you know. And so when you put those two things together, and then you insert human. So where do you insert human on this spectrum, from the very, very biggest thing to the very, very smallest thing? Here, 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 here. And then somebody said, no, hang on a second, let's get the golden ratio. Boom. And where the golden ratio cuts this spectrum, it's like, I think we should put the humans just in here. Boop. Right into that Goldilocks spot of the golden ratio cut. I mean, that's just, this is where I get lifted up by, I mean, I don't know whether you could call this fine tuning, but I would call it like extraordinary, beautiful magic at the very least, you know. But that's the stuff that makes me go, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me that we just slot right in here at that golden ratio cut? And that's why we get like excited about seeing the golden ratio everywhere we look, up, down, right, left, you know. We're rippling with this golden ratio, and that's where we fit in to the spectrum of everything that exists. That's off the charts.
It's like another opportunity for you to be transported and to start to glimpse the perfection of the whole.
Yeah.
Like and how you're given this role at this golden scale to inhabit.
Yeah.
And it's kind of miraculous.
It's magic.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. I know people struggle with the word magic, you know, but I mean, for me, it's extraordinarily beautiful.
Well, it's a sufficiently advanced technology, which is indistinguishable from magic, in the words of Arthur C. Clarke.
I could keep banging on about the Vitruvian Man, but we'll keep going. You know, I like the Vitruvian human. I think that's kind of brings it into the modern age a bit more, you know.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, did Vitruvius say that man is the measure of all things?
No,
that was Protagoras.
That was Protagoras. Yeah, later.
Okay.
Centuries later, a couple centuries later, I think.
Okay. Because and total side note, just a personal take, but I remember when I was first getting into your work, right? I really went deep into Secrets in Plain Sight in 2012, right? And I went on this kind of like epic adventure to a business conference in Amsterdam, right? And just I went to booking.com, booked my hotel, right? And literally, like, I was devouring Secrets in Plain Sight, like wholesale, right? And I remember they said, oh, you're not in this hotel, you're across the road, it's in a suite. And I was like, okay, whatever. It's kind of a quirky, offbeat kind of hotel, but I just picked it totally random off the web. And then I was given like the Leonardo suite, is what it was, right? It was just like, I think it was just the Leonardo suite. And I went into the bedroom, and it was a great big room. And then above in the living room, there was this massive mural of the Vitruvian man, the Vitruvian woman, right, on the wall. And just underneath it had the quote, "Man is the measure of all things, Protagoras." And I was just like, are you kidding me? You know, like, because internally I was just, I was absorbing all of your teaching from Secrets in Plain Sight. And then for my external world to just throw this out at me was like kind of perfect at the time, you know? So anyway, that Protagoras quote isn't actually Leonardo, but I linked them because of that time I went to that hotel, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
But the graphic of the Vitruvian image does speak to that man is the measure of all things, really. That's kind of what the graphic is about, you could argue.
Yeah.
So
but I would say
Protagoras quote fits well.
I would say not to get too in love with ourselves, that we think that the blueprint came from humans.
Yeah.
And then it radiated out to the cosmos. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think that like so many things, yeah, that we resonate with what's already there in the macrocosm. So
yeah,
it stands to reason that our bodies would be built out of the same kind of proportional system that we find elsewhere. And when we start to realize that, it just opens up new vistas of appreciation.
Yeah,
for our
exactly
form.
what it does.
Yeah,
new vistas of appreciation. Exactly what happens.
So should we jump into the next topic, or
I'm loving this?
Cells, we're kind of, this is the jumping off point to go into the microcosm. essentially.
Yeah, I think, Scott, do you know what? Would we take a little break here for our viewers, right? Because I think that was a nice little bite size. And I've got a lot to say about the sales part because I really enjoy this one. And I don't want to rush us on this one. And you know, we're probably going to close off in 10 minutes anyway. So I think sales would be a lovely starting point for tomorrow.
That sounds
we'll
good.
We'll do fine tuning part 3. Yeah. Hope that's okay with you guys. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you for sales in the next video. Thank you very much.